Okay, we are on week 7 of John, and we left off, we had just started chapter 8. And we're going to, a quick review. Remember, the purpose of John is outlined in John 20, verses 30 and 31, where he told us he wrote this so that we could believe that Jesus is the Messiah. So
and through believing have eternal life, he says. That's sort of an important part.
Okay, sorry. Yes. And so all of these examples of signs and wonders that he tells us about, and he makes it clear that he didn't tell us about all the signs. But also something we've realized over the last 6 weeks is there are several themes in John that he keeps bringing up, and that's light and darkness and bread and living water. And we'll see that as we take up, we left off on John chapter 8, and we're starting off on verse 12. Excuse me. Once again, Jesus spoke to the people and said, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. So the Pharisees said to him, you are testifying about yourself. Your testimony is not valid. Jesus replied, even if I testify about myself, my testimony is valid because I know where I came from and where I'm going. But you do not know where I come from or where I'm going. You judge according to the flesh. I judge no one. But even if I do judge, my judgment is true because I am not alone. I am with the Father who sent me. Even in your own law, it is written that the testimony of 2 men is valid. I am one who testifies about myself, and the Father who sent me also testifies about me. Where is your Father? They asked him. You do not know me or my Father, Jesus answered. If you knew me, you would know my Father as well. He spoke these words while teaching in the temple courts near the treasury. Yet no one seized him because his hour had not yet come.
So here's a fun thing. He tells people, I'm the light of the world. And you remember from early, and this is one of those themes that John says in the beginning, the word became flesh, life was in him, and that life was the light of the world. And here Jesus is telling them, this is a thing that John remembers from Jesus' teaching, and he's explaining it to us, making sure we see it. But he says, I'm the light of the world. And what the Jewish leaders do is try to discredit him based on the law. Because as I've told you, under Jewish law, if someone gets brought up on charges, there have to be 2 witnesses. And you can't testify, you can't be made to testify against yourself. This is a court of law thing, but they're going to invalidate. He's talking about himself, and they're utterly twisting. He's not in court. This is not a legal proceeding, but they go, oh, look, you're testifying about yourself. It's not valid. And it's sort of this almost childish attempt to discredit him and make him shut up, make people not listen to him. And he knows better, they know better. But he says, even if I do testify about myself, my testimony is valid because I know where I came from. Now, if this was a court, if he was up on charges, they wouldn't let him testify about himself, but he's not doing that. And he says, I know where I came from. I can tell you who I am. And he says, you judge according to the flesh. I judge no one. And that's another one of those themes that's come back where it says that he came to his own and they rejected him. But to those who did receive him, he gave the right to become the children of God. And it's a lot of this is to get this same message across to us. This idea that he judges no one. It says the ones who didn't believe, who didn't receive him, are condemned already. So he doesn't have to condemn them. What the point here is, they're condemned by their refusal to believe. And it's an interesting distinction. But he says, look, even if I do judge, my judgment is true because I'm not alone. Look, even in your law, if 2 men testify, it's valid. And he says, I testify about me, and my Father testifies about me. And he knows this is not, I mean, this is not a legal proceeding, but it's important for two people to testify to the Jews. And so he says, I testify about me, my Father testifies and has through all the prophecy. And immediately they're going to look for a way to invalidate that. They go, well, okay, where is this Father you're talking about? Well, where's the second person? He says, you don't know me any more than you know my Father. If you knew me, you would know my Father. And again, that's this repeating thing. If you believed in me, you'd believe in the Father. If you believed in the Father, you'd believe in me. And it's a not subtle reminder. He's saying, this is who I am. I am one with the Father. And that, of course, they find threatening.
Should I go on?
Yep.
Again, he said to them, I am going away and you will look for me, but you will die in your sin. Where I am going, you cannot come. So the Jews began to ask, will he kill himself since he says, where I'm going, you cannot come? Then he told them, you are from below, I am from above. You are of this world, I am not of this world. That is why I told you that you would die in your sins. For unless you believe that I am he, you will die in your sins. Who are you? They asked. Just what I've been telling you from the beginning, Jesus replied. I have much to say about you and much to judge, but the one who sent me is truthful, and what I have heard from him, I tell the world. They did not understand that he was telling them about the Father. So Jesus said, when you had lifted up the Son of Man, then you will know that I am he, and that I do nothing on my own, but speak exactly what the Father has taught me. He who sent me is with me. He has not left me alone because I always do what pleases him. The one thing I want to just add before I hand it over to Scott is remembering that John wrote this gospel decades after going through this with Jesus. And you constantly hear in this gospel, almost his reflection that he is. So here he says, they did not understand what he was telling them about the Father. I mean, he's thinking back and he's understanding, and and even the disciples did not understand some of these things.
Later on at the Last Supper, he tells the disciples virtually the same thing. I'm with you only a little longer, and where I'm going, you can't follow. And they didn't understand at the time, but he does these things. And because John is there, we're left with this word, this message that we see and we recognize. And it's kind of a neat arrangement for us. But when he says, I'm going someplace and you can't follow, and they go, what is he going to kill himself? Is he going, where could we not follow? We're powerful. We can do anything we want to do. We're free Jews. Where's he going to go that you can't follow? And he says, you're from below, I'm from above. You're this world, I'm not of this world. I mean, you see what he's telling them, and they're not real happy with it. Unless you believe that I am he, you will die in your sins. And their response is, who are you? Who are you to tell us? Who do you think you are? And his response to that, you got to love it. Just what I've been telling you from the beginning. I've told you a whole bunch of times. I've been telling you from the start, my story hasn't changed. By now, you know who I'm telling you I am. And that's what this whole section, I've tried to make that clear, that it seems almost repetitive. He is making it extremely clear, very, very plain. He's saying, I am the Messiah. I am sent from God. I am one with the Father. And he doesn't hold back. I've said it 2 weeks in a row. I'll say it a third. We get told a lot that, he wasn't divine. And even he didn't think he was. And I just don't know how anyone can try and make that claim. You look at this and he says, this is who I am. You take it or leave it. And you guys are choosing to leave it. But he didn't leave any gray area who he was saying he was.
And we hear that people say, Jesus, I don't believe he was a Messiah. I think he was a good guy. Well, if you don't believe he was a Messiah, he must have been crazy, because he very clearly states he was a Messiah.
And this, I have to confess, I didn't research this week because I didn't notice it. But there's another point, I think it's coming up, where he says, when you've lifted up the Son of Man, you will know that
Right here.
I, huh?
No, we just read it.
Oh,
When
we-
you've lifted up the Son of Man, then you will know that I am he.
Okay,
Verse
there it
28,
is. Then
yeah.
you'll know that I am he. Well, there's this really interesting thing that happens here because they translate it into English and they try and clear it up for us. But if you go back and read the original, you read the Greek, he says, when you have lifted up the Son of Man, and they think that means to exalt. We know that he's talking about the cross. He says, when you've lifted up the Son of Man, then you will know that I am. It's those same words again, that I am. It's the same context as what we got from the burning bush. It's the same context when he told them before Abraham was even born, I am. And here he says it again. When you've lifted up the Son of Man, then you will know that I am. And that is this eternal declaration. I was, I am now, I am in the future. Not I will be, not I was, I am. And it
And
is
that's
this-
where we heard that interesting sermon that in our translation, and I think in most translations, it says, then you will know that I am he. They added the word he to make it clear, and it's actually makes it less clear because it should just say, I am.
And it was, people felt like that sentence just ended abruptly. Some translations say, then you'll know that I am who I claim to be. But those words, I am, especially in front of Jews who know that story, to say I am is to declare that you are one with God. I mean, it is an incredibly strong declaration.
Verse 30, as Jesus spoke these things, many believed in him. So he said to the Jews who had believed him, if you continue in my word, you are truly my disciples. Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. We are Abraham's descendants, they answered. We have never been slaves to anyone. How can you say we will be set free?
Can we stop here?
Yes.
Because this confuses people. Because it says that as he was speaking, many believed in him. And Gene came this morning and said, oh, I don't understand. It says that he believed, and then it's clear that they really don't. And this is another one of those peculiar sort of words. But if you look at what's going on, he's having this debate, this joust with the religious leaders. And there's a group of them, there are some of them, that's what, this is about power and persuasion. They're leaders of the religious group in order to get power from it. And so they see him as being somebody who is persuasive. And so they take his side in the debate. And that word believe is one of these really, really difficult things. It's things that we struggle with. Well, did they truly believe? Did they believe enough? And what you see from this, what's going to get revealed is what this means is they took his side in the debate. They said, okay, you're the winner of the debate. And what he tells them is, well, okay, good. You believe what I'm saying? If you continue in my word, then you'll truly be my disciples. They don't want to be his disciples. It's not that kind of belief. And a disciple is someone, and I think our churches let us down. A disciple is someone who agrees to the teaching, to follow the teaching of either a master or a teacher. But you say, okay, I'm going to follow your teaching. And you become a disciple. It's where we get our word discipline. Not like being beaten, but accepting the discipline of the teaching. And he says, if you continue in my teachings, in my word, you'll truly be my disciples. And you see how much that irritates them. We're gonna go on, but pay attention to it. The idea of them being his disciples just infuriates them. We don't want to be your disciples. And he says, if you do that, you'll understand the truth, and the truth will set you free. And man, it makes them angry. And they say, we are legitimate heirs. We're heirs of Abraham. We're already free. How can you make us free? We're not slaves. We've never been slaves to anyone. So if the bit about them believing and then reacting this way has hung you up, it's because they don't really believe the way you're thinking. It's just about the argument that's going on.
When I think the way, when we hear the word believe, it's either you believe or you don't believe. I think, but I think believe is what we're finding out as we read the Gospel of John, because all of a sudden the disciples hear something else and they believe. And we ask ourselves, well, didn't they believe before? Believe appears to be a process. That word seems
Yeah,
to
but
be
you're going
different.
to, that might confuse people. The fact
Okay.
is that word is one of those that you have to go to the context.
Gotcha.
It gets used for several different things. Let me do a side note on this. In Greek, there are, and Gene and I talked about this morning, there are 4 words for love. There's eros, that is romantic love, physical love, philos, which is brotherly love, agape, which is this sort of self-sacrificing. It's a love for your neighbor that doesn't expect anything in return. And there's actually a 4th that strangely most people don't seem to know about. It's called storge, and it's sort of like what you would have for a grandparent. And they have 4 different, very distinct words. And anytime they use one of them and it gets translated into English, it's one word, love. Well, how could that not be confusing? How could you possibly know which kind of love they're talking about unless somebody goes back to the Greek and says, oh, they said agape, or oh, they said storge. And so it is confusing for us, and don't feel bad if it's confusing. It is. And that's sort of what we're trying to do. But that thing about believing, that word is difficult. And so you have to work at it. And that's what we try and do to help out, to teach. But we worry, do we believe enough? You know, is there a point where you do and a point where you don't, and then you cross a magic line and you do? There is a belief that is authentic. And then there's the kind of belief that says, I think you're at least a prophet. I think you're a pretty powerful guy. You're worthy of me paying attention to. And what we see from this, the point I was trying to make, is that these people believed that he's a prophet or something. But immediately he sees that if he lets them go, they'll try to make him a king. It's that kind of belief. This is somebody we could follow and get behind, and he could become the leader, the Messiah that they think, and run the Romans out of here. It's not the kind of belief that we talk about usually in church. And I'm not putting a fine, edge on this. This is what's going on. And he keeps them from saying, oh, we're going to make this guy our leader, and we'll get power through him. And so he actually sees to it that they don't do that. And let's go
Okay,
on.
so remember, he has said,
Gene.
okay, Gene.
But this red letter line here at 30 says, then you will know the truth.
Yes.
No, not believe in the truth. Believe in me, just believe the truth. And the truth will set you free. That truth, that second part of that one, context to me is the spiritual world. You're with the sin, he's going to set you free from slavery, which is coming down the road here, right? We're talking about freedom for everlasting life. That's what that sentence is to me. The first one is, I don't know how you can know the truth. The first part of that sentence.
Well, you'll know the truth that he is, that I am. You'll understand who he is. And it's an important distinction, that these people think he's a prophet or he's a great leader, or maybe he's just going to be the one that delivers Israel. And the whole time he's telling them that I'm something else. And he told them, what was it last week or here, you're a slave to sin. They're thinking about a slave in terms of I report to you, you control me.
To the Romans.
And he's saying it's not a matter of you being a slave to the Romans or someone else. You're a slave to sin. And I'm going to show you the truth. And once I've been lifted up, then if you're the ones who are my disciples, then you'll know. It's all one teaching, Gene. It's all the same thing. Yes, you'll there will come a time that you'll know the truth that I am. And we see later, of course, that they did. And I know it's confusing. I know it's hard. This section takes some work. But the big thing is, I believe in there's a place called Russia. I've never been there. I've never seen it with my own eyes, but I'm content that it's there. There are all kinds of things that mean believe, but to actively take the part that says, you are the Messiah, you are the deliverer, I accept your teachings, I will follow and be a disciple, that's different. And I think we're capable of understanding that distinction.
Jesus replied, truly, truly, I tell you, everyone who sins is a slave to sin. A slave is not a permanent member of the family, but a son belongs to it forever. So if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed. I know you're Abraham's descendants, but you're trying to kill me because my word has no place
Oh,
within
you skipped that we are Abraham's descendants at 33.
Okay, sorry. I'll start back at 33. We are Abraham's descendants. So he was telling them that you need to be a disciple of mine. And instead they're saying, we are Abraham's descendants, they answered. We have never been slaves to anyone. How can you say we will be set free? Jesus replied, truly, truly, I tell you, everyone who sins is a slave to sin. A slave is not a permanent member of the family, but a son belongs to it forever. So if the Son sets you free, you'll be free indeed. I know you are Abraham's descendants, but you're trying to kill me because my word has no place within you. I speak of what I have seen in the presence of the Father, and you do what you have heard from your father. Abraham is our father, they replied. If you were children of Abraham, says Jesus, you would do the works of Abraham. But now you're trying to kill me, a man who has told you the truth that I heard from God. Abraham never did such a thing. You are doing the works of your father.
Let's pause there. So he's told them about being his disciples, and they go through this thing about our genealogy. We're not slaves to anybody. We're free Jews. How dare you say that? They say we are Abraham's descendants. And there's several times where they fall back on that, talking to Jesus in their arguments. We're descendants of Abraham, and they're so caught up in that they can't see anything else. That's their way of self-justifying. I don't have to answer for anything. I'm Abraham's descendants. And there's one of these times where Jesus tells them, you know what, I'll tell you the truth. God could raise up descendants of Abraham from those rocks. It's just not that special. Okay, it doesn't entitle you to anything, but they cling to it so heavily. We're Abraham's descendants. We've never been slaves to anyone. And I skipped ahead again, didn't I? Yeah, we've never been slaves to anyone. And he says, you know, you're a slave to sin. I covered that. But then he says, I know you're Abraham's descendants, but you're trying to kill me, right? My word is, you're trying to kill me because my word has no place within you. I speak of what I've seen in the presence of the Father, in the presence of the Father, and you do what you've heard from your father. Now, this lineage, this genealogy is really, really important. That's one of the things that you kind of have to take in. The genealogy is a big deal. We don't know where you're from. We don't know who you are. We know that you're from Galilee, which he really wasn't. But you see the way they justify themselves. They take pride. They have the stiff collars, you know, they take pride in their lineage, and that makes me better than you. And he says, they go back again. Abraham is our father. And he says, if you really were children of Abraham, you would do the works of Abraham. But now you're trying to kill me, a man who has told you the truth that I heard from God. There's a place way back there. Abraham is the beginning of this. God told him to pack up and leave and come to this other place. And we're told that Abraham believed, and it was counted unto him as righteousness. And it's one of those really cool things that it was counted. God has, you know, that ability. Abraham truly believed. If we want to talk about belief, Abraham believed enough. He got up, packed his people up, and left. And it says it was counted to him as righteousness. It was truth. And he says, if you were really descendants of Abraham, you'd behave like Abraham. Here, you're trying to kill a man for telling you the truth that I've heard from God. And he says, you're doing the works of your father, which he's clearly saying is Satan. I mean, when this finally dawns on them that he's not just talking about, a father, he's saying that, they're going to explode.
We are not illegitimate children, they declared. Our only father is God himself. Jesus said to them, if God were your father, you would love me, for I have come here from God. I have not come on my own, but he sent me. Why do you not understand what I am saying? It is because you're unable to accept my message. You belong to your father, the devil, and you want to carry out his desires. He was a murderer from the beginning, refusing to uphold the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks his native language, because he's a liar and the father of lies. But because I speak the truth, you do not believe in me. You do not believe me. Which of you can prove me guilty of sin? If I speak the truth, why do you not believe me? Whoever belongs to God hears the words of God. The reason you do not hear is that you do not belong to God. Wow, you wonder why the Pharisees got mad.
And this, as we've talked about in other studies, this was not his time, but this certainly sets the stage. And they go through this, and you notice how they change course. Abraham, we're descendants of Abraham. And then he shoots that down, and they say, our only father is God. Later, they're going to say, we're descendants of Moses. They just keep shifting because he keeps cutting off their story. And so, he says, our only father is God. He says, if you knew God, you'd know me. If you love God, you'd love me. I'm telling you the truth. Why don't you believe it? Can any of you prove me guilty of sin? Can any of you, come up with a place that is, and he said, you don't believe me because the truth isn't in you, because the Father isn't in you. So, you can't understand what I'm saying because you refuse to, because the truth isn't in you. And you should know, I certainly know, because when you try and argue with somebody like that, they're not going to be persuaded. The truth isn't in you. We see it all the time. Anytime you look at the news, you look at some of these things people say and you go, what are you thinking saying something like that? Well, you're not going to tell them that's not true. And they're going to go, oh, you're right. I'm sorry. I take that back. So why is he doing this? Why is he having this sort of futile debate or accusation or discussion with these people? This is for us. This is, it was for his disciples and it is for us. And we look at this and we're able to see, he's telling them, I am absolutely that Messiah that has been prophesied, the one that you claim you've been waiting for. And I bring you things that are truth. You refuse to accept them. And it should be sort of a reminder to us at times, I think. But this is not a teaching that's going to convert them. And he knows it because he knows they're going to wind up killing him. When his time does come, these are going to be the people who do it. This is there for his disciples. This is here for us.
So last week, when we started this section on 7 and 8, we started with this last session. So we've already gone over verses 48 through 59. And just to recap, once again, he's talking about Abraham. Do you want me to read it again or just the ending part?
Just that one section of, about Abraham, and you've seen him.
Then, where do you want me to start? Down here?
Yeah, about 27 or something, 57.
57. Then the Jews said to him, you are not yet 50 years old, and you have seen Abraham? Truly, truly, I tell you, Jesus declared, before Abraham was born, I am. At this, they picked up stones to throw at him, but Jesus was hidden and went out of the temple area.
So again, I'll do another real quick side note. Keep in mind that when this was written, There were no chapter numbers and there were no verse numbers. It wasn't divided up like that. And Mary is really good. I know sometimes I tease, she's really good at the verse order. And I don't exactly read it and remember it that way. And so I do tend to skip ahead. Mary would do things absolutely in order. But we did talk about this, and he's told them that he's declaring who he is. And he says, you know, Abraham looked to see me, and he did see me, and he was glad. And that just freaks him out. They said, you're not even 50 and you've seen Abraham, you know Abraham. And he says, yeah, before Abraham was, and I know the translations say was born, but it's really important. Before Abraham even was, I am. Now that's not a way you would talk. You would say, before Abraham was born, I already was. But he says, I am. Keep that in mind. That declaration, that timelessness that says, I am, I am, I am, I am. Not I was, not I will be. This is so strong. And that really sets them off.
And the audience understood it. We have a hard time understanding it, but when he said, I am.
It goes back to Moses, the burning bush. He's told he's supposed to go to Egypt, and he's trying to get out of it. And he, you know, God's not letting him out. He says, okay, who do I tell these Egyptians you are? They don't know anything about you. Who do I tell them you are? And he says, you tell them I am. And again, it's that eternal, timeless declaration. This is the God who was, is, and will be. I am. He's pronouncing the same thing. So deny?
See, I see the Jews here having no choice. We say that they knew the scriptures and so forth, but he's telling them the same word, I am, way back to the original. And he's telling them, I am, and it goes one ear and out the other. They
Yeah.
do not believe him. They do not want to believe him. He's a good guy, maybe. So when he says, I'm born, I mean, how much more before Abraham was born, I am? I mean, that's period, new paragraph, argument is over. Now you have to decide, do you believe me or do you not believe me? And whatever your choice is, it's on you, because I'm not going to judge you.
Yeah. Good point. And it's worth, you know, we don't want to teach just a history class, but it's important sometimes to understand what's going on. These leaders, these Pharisees, are really a political party. They have long since. I mean, the high priests have had other high priests murdered. They've had their mother murdered so that they could kill the brother and become high priest. They've bought and sold high priesthoods. They've gone to the Romans and paid money to become high priest. And then another one outbids the first one. And they say, well, yeah, then fine, we'll let you be high priest. If you're big enough to take it, the job is yours. They have utterly abandoned the worship of Yahweh. When the Romans finally got into the city of Jerusalem, the walled city. Now, you know, they were like ants. They're pretty persistent. They probably would have gotten in, but the Jews held out a long, long time. When the Romans finally got into the walled city of Jerusalem, it was the Pharisees who opened the gate to them. If that gives you any kind of context of who he's dealing with, these people that he's dealing with are about power. I probably shouldn't liken them to modern politicians, but I do. And they're all about power and what can bring me more influence. And they're constantly jockeying. And don't you think it's odd that here's a people that have longed for the arrival of the Messiah for, thousands of years? And he arrives and they're not interested. I mean, all they want to do is invalidate any argument that he has rather than testing it against the scriptures to see if the prophecies are really there. Last week, we saw them say, well, you're from Galilee. And they tell Nicodemus, Look it up. No prophet ever comes from Galilee. He can't be the Messiah. He can't be even a prophet because he's from Galilee. And he wasn't even from Galilee. It didn't matter. All they want is to just discredit because they're in control. What would happen if a real Messiah shows up? So, now he's the bigger, yeah. And so this is what's going on. And this is what it's important to see in all of these discussions. He knows they're not going to hear him and go, oh, wow, okay, now I see it. You've heard these things in the presence of the Father himself. We believe it isn't going to happen. Understand the context, and you understand this is the
I
details.
do, but I do want to remind people, it's not all of them, because you have to look back at like Nicodemus, and you have to realize how wonderful Nicodemus was. Nicodemus came, he was a Pharisee, he was a member of the Sanhedrin, not just a Pharisee, but one of the big leaders. He came in the night to see Jesus, and that was as gutsy as he could be. But boy, that was gutsy when you realize this stuff. And then he has already challenged the Pharisees here, and we'll see him again in John's gospel. We see him.
Mary and I had that discussion this morning. There are places here where Jesus tells these people, you don't know me. You don't know the Father. You don't believe. It's not our place to do that. We're not him. And for us to look at somebody and say, well, the way that person behaves, I don't think they really believe. If you ever catch yourself out on that limb, try and crawl back to something more sturdy. It's not our place to try and say whether that person believes or not. Jesus has that right. But yes, it's also true that not all of the Pharisees were bad people. Not all of the Pharisees rejected him. We know Nicodemus didn't, and there's reason to believe there's some others. So that's a good point. Thank you, because I lose that.
Chapter 9 is all one story. It's sort of divided in 3 places, and we probably won't get through all of chapter 9 today, but it is all one story about Jesus healing a blind man. Chapter 9, verse 1. Now, as Jesus was passing by, he saw a man blind from birth, and his disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Jesus answered, neither this man nor his parents sinned, but this happened so that the works of God would be displayed in him. While it is daytime, we must do the works of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world. When Jesus had said this, he spit on the ground, made some mud, and applied it to the man's eyes. Then he told him, go wash in the pool of Siloam, which means sent. So the man went and washed and came back seeing. At this, his neighbors and those who had formerly seen him begging asked him, isn't this the man who used to sit and beg? Some claimed that he was, but others said, no, he just looks like him. But the man kept saying, I am the one. How then were your eyes open? They asked. He answered, the man they called Jesus made some mud and anointed my eyes and told me to go to Siloam and wash. So I went and washed and received my sight. Where is he? They asked. I do not know, he answered.
So this starts out, they're passing by a man who's been blind from birth. And these poor people sit and beg, and it's their only way to get, food. It's a pretty lousy existence. And his disciples, picture this, his disciples turn to him and say, Master, who sinned for this man to be in this condition? Who sinned? Was it him? Was it his parents, his grandparents? And that's sort of this belief that for somebody to be in that condition is the result that somebody sinned. And they actually believed, well, it could be the sin of the father carried down to the son. And it is, you talk about your bad habits, but we tend to do that. And not only that, we tend to see things that people do and say, I hope they get what they have coming. And it is the same idea that something bad should happen because this person sinned. For starters, just, the easiest thing to see is if sinning results in something like blindness, we'd all be blind. And especially if you can go back a couple of generations, now, I mean, we would all be terribly afflicted. This is a thing they have gotten to, and you have to look to the heart. It is this idea of saying, look at that. I don't have any afflictions. I've got money. I've got my health. I don't have anybody in the family who's blind, and nobody in the family who's been to prison, for instance. And therefore I'm superior. I've got all of this going for me. These people don't deserve all the stuff I've got. They're not as good as me. I mean, that's what's going on. And his disciples have lived in that. And they said, so how come he's here? How come? Who sinned? And he says, it's not a result of sin. There's no sin involved in this. In fact, you want to read the exact quote?
Yeah,
You have it?
neither this man nor his parents sinned, but this happened so that the works of God would be displayed in him.
It's a hard thing to tell someone who's in a bad situation. And then there's a million different things I could be talking about that God can use you and will use you even in this condition. Mary had that friend who was dying of cancer, remember? And even at the end, you saw in her the grace, the peace. And I think that's been sort of a guidepost for you.
For sure. Like I said, I had two people dying at the same time. This was a woman who was in a woman's Bible study I was in, and we were acquaintances at best, just because of how long I'd been in the Bible study, et cetera. But anyhow, she had asked for me to come visit her. And it turned out to be the week before she passed away. And I went in and, she's someone who had fought cancer for 9 years. It had come back, and her husband had Alzheimer's. She was estranged from one of her children. I mean, she was just one of those, you just wondered, how could someone have so many burdens? And there she was in her room, and she was, I mean, if I have a vision of an angel on earth, this is her. She just had this beautiful white gown on, and she had her bedroom open up to the garden. And she said she just really wanted to see me. And like I said, she was somebody who was a devout Bible study person over the years. And she says, I'm not reading the Bible, I'm reading People's Magazine. She says, I'm going to be with the Lord soon enough where I'm going to hear first, and I just want to read People's Magazine again. But she said, but I wanted to let you know that, things aren't perfect. Things aren't going to get resolved with my daughter. My husband's out there with Alzheimer's. I don't know what's going to happen there, but God's got this. And she says, and she says, do I believe? I feel like I'm a cat with 9 lives. Every time I thought it was the end, God has cured me. Do I believe he could cure me now? I certainly do. But, it doesn't look like it. And you know what? I'm okay with that. And she says, I just wanted to let you know, I'm going to see you again. Sorry. And I thought, talking about someone, as Scott said, that has been sort of a guidepost to my life, to have such joy and the understanding that the why, how could all these bad things happen to this one person who to me seems so good? It wasn't ours to ask. And she had gotten to the point she was given the peace that she didn't need the whys anymore. Sorry.
So he says that this is there so that the works of God would be displayed in him. And he knows he's about the healing. The works of God are going to be really displayed in this guy. And so he says, while it's daylight, we have to do the works of him who sent me. Night is coming. While I'm in the world, I'm the light of the world. And once again, here we are with him being the light. And saying that, he says, he reaches down, and this is such an odd thing with, spit in the dirt and make the mud. And he does these things different ways. And I think there's some reasons, but I would have to speculate. I try not to. But he says, go to this place called this pool called Sent. He's been sent. Wash him off, and you'll receive your sight. And he does. And it is something that people don't want to accept. You've got a guy blind from birth. That means from the time he got old enough to sit at this place and beg, people have passed him every single day. There's never been a time he wasn't there. His parents would have kept him, but when you hit, bar mitzvah age, you're a man, you got to make your own way. And this is the only way. This is, an amazing thing. And immediately people look for a way to disbelieve it. And they say, this isn't the same guy who's been here. It's a guy who looks like him. It's not him. Strangely, the guy who looks like him is not here anymore, but they can't
Wrap their arms around
wrap their arms around it. They can't believe it. And he keeps saying, I am the guy. I'm the guy. I'm the guy. I really, really am. And they're just not going to believe it. How then were your eyes open? And he tells the story about the mud. I mean, he tells the physical story. And they say, okay, where is this guy? It's like Scooby-Doo. I won't row. I don't know where he's at. He's gone.
One of the ministers of the gospel or sermon we listened to this week said, they asked him where he is, and he should have said, I don't know, I was blind when he sent me to the pool.
That's right. The last time I was with him, I couldn't see. How do I know where he went? It's a pretty good point. So let's keep going. Yes.
I see two chats, and we're getting close in time, and if they need an answer, that you can come and everybody.
Thank you, Gene.
I'm a little reminder to, when I see the word disciple, the first image in my mind is apostles, and they're two different things.
They are.
These guys, disciples, could be any of the followers at the time that thought they were going to be real disciples. They were just following Jesus. Would that be?
Yeah, so we were just going to do lots of side trips today. At that time, and a lot of other times, but there would be these teachers. In Jerusalem was a guy named Gamaliel, who was they'd go to his school. But to be a disciple of someone, you say, okay, I believe in your teachings enough that I'm going to agree to follow them. I'm gonna, and sometimes people reach a point and they say, wait a minute, I'm not so with this anymore. And they leave. They were disciples while they were there following. And we saw that 2 or 3 weeks ago when Jesus says, you have to eat my flesh and drink my blood. And we understand, he even says, I was talking in terms of spirit, but they heard that and they said, this is a tough teaching. That's enough. And I'm not going to bring in a scene from Catch-22 that my dad and I used to talk about, but they decide I've followed about far enough, right? And that happens. It doesn't mean that you weren't a disciple. You can reach a point with these teachers that you go, enough. Now, how does that play in to when we talk about being disciples of Christ? If you leave, does that mean you never really believed? And this is this thing that hangs us up. I will just tell you, I stay away from that discussion. I do know that to be a disciple, you don't get to pick and choose. Even back then, these other people, these other teachers, if you go, you know what, I want to be a disciple, but this thing you say about, having to fast, I'm not going to do that part. And the teacher is going to tell you, take a hike. You're either a disciple or you're not. And we tend to want to pick and choose. We see things in the scripture and we go, well, that's unpleasant. That sort of affects me. I don't really want to think about that part. And we just throw them out. And that's not what disciple means. I know that sounds harsh, but that's not what disciple means. You can be a fan. You can be a follower. I'm convinced that it's possible to be an actual, what we call a believer, but not be a disciple. A disciple has a specific meaning.
When I read about go wash at the pool of Siloam, I don't think Siloam, that particular pool, is an accident. I think it has undertones of belief. It's sent by the Father to me. And to me, you go to this pool and you get your sight back.
We have this thing with Jesus' healings. There's times he tells people, your faith has made you whole. There's some other accounts where he just heals people. It's a teaching,
They do nothing.
and they don't,
Physically.
there's no indication that it has to do with their faith. And once again, I tend to be shy of those things. You can say, well, what happens if the man says, this is nuts, you just put some mud on my face, go away? I don't know what happens. I think Jesus knows who the man is. I think it's understood. But we tend to want to worry about things that are, for me, they're above my pay grade. He does this, and the word Siloam does mean sent. And he's been sent and he goes. And there probably is a teaching to us that when you're sent, you should go. I mean, you go act on it. And there are times that I think God lays things on our hearts and says, do this, go here. And it's a good idea. I think in general, it's pretty good practice to follow up. As Jean rightly pointed out, we're coming to the end of our time, but let's read the first little section here
Okay.
in 9, or in this next.
So they brought to the Pharisees the man who had been blind. Now the day on which Jesus had made the mud and opened the eyes was a Sabbath. So the Pharisees also asked him how he had received his sight.
That's good.
Okay.
That's all we have time for.
Once again, he did this on the Sabbath. And we have read over the last couple of weeks, a couple of the times where Jesus does one of his miracles is on the Sabbath. And it can't be an accident. As someone says, if he didn't want to bring it up on the Sabbath, there were 6 other days he could have healed people. But it appears to us that he did a lot of his healings on the Sabbath. Must have been on purpose.
Especially in this time. Yeah, this trip to Jerusalem.
Especially in front of Pharisees.
In front of Pharisees, yeah. And it makes a point, but you notice it says they brought the man who'd been healed to the Pharisees. You got to think about that. This tells you more about where they lived. They just hauled him to the Pharisees. It doesn't sound like he had any real choice about it. All he'd done is be blind and then get healed, and they're hauling him up in front of the Pharisees. They have the ability, I guess you'd say the right, to just grab somebody and drag them in front of the Pharisees. And you always know it's sort of like getting sent to the principal when you're little and in school. This is not good. Nobody sends you to the principal for a good reason. You're in trouble. And they haul him in front of the Pharisees. And he's got to be a little worried about it, but we'll learn more about what happens. But they want to know, how were you healed? Okay, if you're really the guy, if this really happened, how did it happen? And what can he tell them? He can tell them, this guy named Jesus put mud on my eyes and told me to go wash, and after I did, I was healed. If they were inclined to believe that story, they would have believed a whole bunch of the other stories. They don't. They're looking for a way to kill him. They're looking for a way to prove something bad has happened. And as you're going to see next week, there's always this debate over whether this is being done through the power of God or some other, we say Satan, that word means the enemy, but whether it's being done through the power of God or the power of the enemy. And they always are going to set themselves up as the judge and arbiter of that. Just for, as we close, think about, though, you've just been healed and you're being hauled to the principal's office. This is not how things are supposed to go. And that's part of the teaching of this whole section, is that they don't care about the person being healed. They care about the fact it was done on the Sabbath, and they're looking for a way to condemn. And it's not too different from today. You got anything else?
Nope.
God, we see in these things ourselves too often. We find ourselves trying to be the judge, trying to determine whether someone else's belief, whether their faith is sufficient, is real, rather than looking at ourselves. rather than finding ways to help them believe, even if they don't. And we see these examples, and sometimes we overlook the teaching that that's us. But for your grace, that's us. And what we ask for is help with that. As always, it's the reminder that you bestow the grace. Our job is to be there and to tell, but it's not up to us to decide. We're always thankful for the words you leave behind. We have this gathering today, and so many of us, the gift that you give us, one of the big gifts, is the gift of each other. Be with us as we gather, be present with us, and be present with us this week. Amen.
And you guys can unmute yourself. For those of you in Rockport, remember Sherry and David and Jack and Z are having a open house nacho thing from 4 to 7 at their house. And I think you guys have all received invites.
It's right over by the Fulton Mansion, though. If you-
Right behind the Fulton Mansion, yeah. So from 4 to 7, and I know Jack is here today, Sherry and Dave and Z are back at the house getting ready. So I know they'd like to see anybody who can stop by anytime between 4 and 7.
And I don't listen to names when people give them. That's the real truth. I can say I don't always remember them. It's because I'm not listening. Our phone caller,
Monica.
Monica, it's good to have you with us. Maybe sometimes we can see a picture of you on the screen. But thanks for being here.
And you guys have a good 4th of July, everybody.
You
Happy
too. Bye-bye.
Fourth.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
If we
Happy
don't-